I'm Jennifer Delliquadri, and this is the Raising Happy Teens podcast, where you learn how to successfully guide your teenager into adulthood without losing your sanity in the process. Let's do this. Welcome back to the podcast. This episode is going to be a little bit different because I have an announcement. And before I get to that, it's going to be a little bit, just a kind of a discussion here where I'm sharing a few things, and it's like you and I are sitting across from one another at a coffee shop. We both have our favorite drink, and I am sharing with you something that is very exciting for me and hopefully for you too. I've been putting off recording this episode because I have a lot of mixed emotions about what I'm about to announce, and deep down, everything that I'm going to be sharing with you is coming from a place of excitement and self-trust and just my overall desire to be part of a positive change and a positive impact for other people. When I decided to become an entrepreneur long time ago, it was not for selfish reasons. Yes, there were reasons I wanted to be able to be an entrepreneur. It excited me, but it was because I wanted to make an impact, a positive impact on other people's lives. And I knew that I had a purpose and a calling in this world. And at the time, I had no idea what that would be. And I've spent a lot of time and energy and therapy sessions and coaching sessions trying to figure out, what is that purpose? What is that reason I'm here? And I know one of the reasons I'm here, one of my life's callings, is to be a teacher. That's a given. I was a teacher in my professional life. I was a yoga instructor. On this podcast, I'm teaching. It is my calling in life. And I don't always know as an entrepreneur, or I didn't at the beginning, what is it I'm here to teach? And I've been exploring that. And I started the Raising Happy Teens podcast in 2022 because at the time I was raising my two teenagers and in the middle of handling some of the most challenging experiences as a parent or as a person in my entire life. My daughter was struggling immensely with her mental health. My younger daughter was starting to struggle as well. And I felt lost. And I wanted to be part of a solution for other people who are in that situation. Because at the time I started my podcast, it wasn't the very beginning of her struggle. It was kind of in the middle, if I'm going to be honest, or maybe toward the end. She's still struggling. This is not over, right? We're not out of the woods. Things are better, obviously. But in that span of time before I started the podcast, I learned so much about teenagers and mental health and parenting, how to show up for my teenager, and I wanted to be able to share that. And that's why I started the Raising Happy Teens podcast, because I'd learned so many things. And in the past 3 years, I've continued to learn so much about parenting, people, teenagers, and of course, above all, myself. And so let's kind of circle it back a little bit to what I'm here to talk about today. And I'm at a point in my life, I know I mentioned, where I have just recently had an evolution as a person. And I talked about this on my midlife menopause episode. I know many of you listened to that, and I've gotten many comments on it because it resonated with a lot of you. I have kind of come through that, and I feel like I'm in a different place in my life now where I have expanded as a person, expanded energetically, and I have more to offer. And I, to be totally honest, have been feeling a little bit blocked with this podcast because there's so many things I want to talk about that don't directly relate to parenting a teenager. Yes, it would help in parenting a teenager, but there's so many more things that I want to talk about, learn, explore, have guests on to talk about, without it needing to directly relate to parenting. So all that being said, long story short, the Raising Happy Teens podcast is evolving. Right alongside me and right alongside with you. We as partners are evolving, and I would love for you to continue on this journey with me. And I want to share with you a little bit more about what you can expect from this podcast, because if I know anything, I know that we as people want to know what we're getting into. And the word change can feel really scary. Changing things can be a little bit jarring on the nervous system. I know all of us have been through so much change these past few years. And the last thing you need is another thing that's changing, which is why I'm veering away from explaining it as a change. I'm explaining it as an evolution. And that's kind of going to be the theme of this podcast moving forward. We're all transforming in our life. And one thing I know is that transformation is like a cyclical thing. It's like a helix. I don't believe that I've talked about this on the podcast. I definitely talked about it in the group, but I see growth not as, you're just going in a straight line up. It's where you're going through cycles, where you learn lessons. And as you slowly make your way up the helix, you're evolving and you're changing and you're growing and you're learning and you're becoming another version of yourself. So that when those challenges come up again, you're kind of a different person. Right? And you have other tools to handle it. You have lessons learned along the way. And if you're not evolving up the helix, you're just going in circles on a hamster wheel. And I didn't want to feel like I was going in circles on a hamster wheel. I felt myself evolving from the inside, and I wanted to be able to reflect that on the outside. And so let me explain to you what you can expect going forward. First, let me talk about the name of the podcast. So I started my business, I registered my business in 2019, and I named it. It was a name that I came up with probably 2 or 3 years before that, when I wasn't even sure I was going to be an entrepreneur. And the name that came to me at that time, probably 2017, was Subtle Shifts. And that name really resonated with me because anytime I've ever evolved in my life, whether it's, physically, mentally, spiritually, socially, it hasn't been a drastic jump. It's been because I've been taking small steps in the direction I want to go. So like with fitness, I'm not doing a complete overhaul on my workout. I'm making a choice to go to the gym 3 times a week and I'm sticking with it. Right? I'm taking one small step at a time. I'm not changing at all because change can be really scary on your nervous system. So I really liked the name Subtle Shifts. I did nothing with it at the time. Actually, I think I started an Instagram account that still exists, and it's called Subtle Shifts. And it's still there under my name. But at the time, I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And then in 2019, when I left my teaching career and moved 1,000 miles away from my home, I'll talk more about that later, but I don't think I've shared that story here on the podcast. But when I did that and I launched my business, I named it Subtle Shifts. And since then, I've just been going by my name, Jennifer Delliquadri. That's been my business name. It's my handle on social media. And then until Raising Happy Teens, there was no really title for my business, except for me, I knew my title was Subtle Shifts. That's what it's registered under. And so when I was going through this evolution and considering making this change on the podcast, I thought about, do I want to change the name? Do I want to start a new podcast? And I decided, you know what? The things I'm talking about, the things that I want to talk about, will still help the same audience. And I'm still going to be talking about parenting because that is part of life. That is part of what many of us are going through. But I wanted to take on that name, Subtle Shifts. It's the name I've had for a long time, and it's really feels so good to be able to put it out there, something that came to me so long ago, and I just knew that it was the direction I was going to go, but I didn't know what the end would look like. And I know I'm not at the end, but I didn't know how it would fit in. And so it just fits. So the new name of the podcast is Subtle Shifts with Jennifer Delliquadri. And here's what you can expect. We're still going to talk about parenting. Parenting in all different formats, whether you have younger kids or teenagers or you have young adults, whatever phase of parenting you're in, we're going to talk about those kinds of things. But we're also going to talk about the other areas of life. So health, emotional well-being, physical well-being. We're going to talk about relationships, social relationships, friendships, and of course, romantic relationships. Those are big parts of all of our lives. We're also going to talk about finances, money, growing money, saving money, feeling content with money. We're going to talk about spirituality and exploring purpose and passion and what does it all mean. We're going to talk about all those things too. We're going to talk about home. We're going to talk about how to manage your time. We're going to talk about all the to-dos that can make your life feel better so that when you go to bed at night, you can feel content. When you wake up in the morning, you feel inspired. And this is all of the process that I know that I've been on these past few years, my whole life. We've all been on this our whole life. And so that's what you can expect moving forward. I can't tell you exactly what every podcast is going to be about, but we're going to be talking about some things that I haven't talked about yet. And I would love for you to come along for the ride. And before I wrap up and I kind of tell you what to expect in the next couple of weeks, when I released the first episode of the Raising Happy Teens podcast, it was February 2nd, 2022 to 2/22. And I really am interested in numerology. I'm no expert, but I really liked the number 2. And I have some stories that go with numerology, but I won't get into that. Again, we'll get into that down the road. But that made part of my decision on when to launch, right? And so when it came time to when to change or when to make this shift, this podcast is coming out on February 12th, 2025. And so I looked up, what does 12 mean? What does 2 mean? And it just kind of fit. The number 12 represents cycles, divine timing, new beginnings, and starting on a new journey. I saw that and I said, okay, this is it. It's time to let that shift happen. It's time to let this podcast evolve. And I am so excited for this new direction. I'm so excited to get this new title started. It's going to go into effect next week, which is the 12th, and episode 156, where I'm going to be sharing with you a brand new tool that is going to help you embrace your evolution and design a life that really feels aligned and purposeful for you. So you're not going to want to miss that. And if you're coming along with me, I'm so glad that you are. And if this doesn't apply to you, please continue to listen to the first 150 episodes of the show. They're not going anywhere. And from the bottom of my heart, just thank you for an amazing 3 years of the Raising Happy Teens podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for supporting the show and doing the work to be a better parent. Let's just continue the work and be an even better person for those we love, and most of all for ourselves. So thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time. If you liked this episode, I'd like to invite you to join Raising Happy Teens, my free online community for parents of teenagers, where every week I host Ask a Coach. You bring your parenting questions, and I provide expert advice and coaching. Click the link in the show notes to join today. I'll see you inside.